Today, we're going to do a little mini dive into why China is interested in the Indian Ocean. Before I talk about that, perhaps I should tell you why anyone would care about the Indian Ocean and what's important about it. In fact, that whole part of the Indo-Pacific is incredibly important to global energy security and security in general. Half of the world's container traffic passes through the Indian Ocean on its way to Asia and North Asia, as well as Australia. The region is home to 40% of the world's offshore energy production. And then for China, 80% of its imports, including energy imports like oil and LNG, pass through this tiny little choke point in Malaysia, the Malacca Straits. This makes the Indian Ocean so important and the Malacca Straits a real problem for China's energy security, to the point that they call the Malacca Straits choke point the Malacca Dilemma. So how does China approach this challenge of securing its energy supply and its access in general to global supply chains? One of the ways is through an initiative that will be very familiar to all of you, the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a global network of infrastructure and other projects designed to keep China connected to all of its key markets around the world, but particularly in the Indian Ocean. China has in fact supported almost 38 projects under the Belt and Road Initiative in the Indian Ocean region, and 30 of these are port projects. You've probably heard of China's investment in ports in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan. It's also invested in port infrastructure in smaller countries that you might not have thought about. Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania. It's attempted to build a port in a small country called Comoros in the Western Indian Ocean, and it's just had a deal knocked back in Tanzania to build a port in a place called Bagamoyo, which, if the deal had been successful, would have given China free access to 900 kilometres of coastline and prevented any other party from building a port along that coast. In tandem with that work to shore up its access to ports around the Indian Ocean rim, it's also investing in telecommunications projects, undersea cables, and some projects that perhaps from an Australian perspective might look a little bit worrying. Let me give you an example. In 2016, China signed a deal with the Mauritian government, again in the Western Indian Ocean, to provide the country with almost 4,000 Huawei-built smart city cameras. These cameras were provided to a country that in fact has one of the lowest crime rates in Africa. In tandem with its infrastructure building projects, China's also really putting a lot of effort into what's called soft power or public diplomacy. It has embassies, for example, in every single island in the Western Indian Ocean: Seychelles, Mauritius, Madagascar, Comoros. Only France also has a diplomatic presence of that size in these small parts of the Western Indian Ocean. It has a very extensive public diplomacy program that it prosecutes through Confucius Institutes as well. Around the entire Indian Ocean rim, there are 83 Confucius Institutes. The other avenue that China is attempting to build up its influence in the Indian Ocean is through regional forums and multilateral institutions. So, for example, it's now an observer of the Indian Ocean Commission, a sub-regional organisation that takes in Comoros, Reunion, Mauritius, Madagascar and Seychelles. It's an observer to the Indian Ocean Rim Association, which takes in all of the Indian Ocean nations, as well as an observer to thematic organisations like, for example, the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission. And in parallel, it's trying to set up its own forums and dialogues to prosecute its interests in the Indian Ocean. For example, it organised a regional conference, the China Indian Ocean Regional Forum, in China in late 2022, although it didn't invite one of the biggest countries with Indian Ocean interests, India. So that's a good segue, I guess, to start to think about what could be some of the challenges of China's engagement in the Indian Ocean and why there could be both positives and negatives to that engagement. Of course, investment in infrastructure, promotion of cultural interests and values, and engagement with partners is really welcome, and all countries do that. But if that engagement is not happening transparently, or it's not also involving other players who have clear regional and strategic interests in the region, like India, that could be problematic. And for Australia, where a third of its coastline faces the Indian Ocean, we really do need to think about the strategic balance of power in an ocean that is very much part of our geostrategic calculations. Longer term, we don't know what China's intentions might be in the Indian Ocean or what the impacts might be for Australia. But what we do need to understand is that it's happening and that it could change the balance of power. And for that reason, we need to factor in a good understanding of China's actions in the Indian Ocean into our policy making and thinking.